So yeah, this is an article from The Verge, and the headline here is Google confirms it's training Bard on scraped web data too. Now, I think there's some really interesting things here. So basically, Bard. So this is okay. This is a little bit of an annoyance factor for me. We have these privacy policies. You have to say yes to privacy policy to make things work. They're written in, 4 points font or something like that. They're deliberately vague and opaque and all these kinds of things. And at this point, you just sort of automatically push yes. And yet, when you do that, you're saying yes to a lot of stuff, right, David?
I heard someone say that the most commonly told lie in the 21st century is I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions.
Right. And it annoys me because I'm a kind of person who likes to read stuff, and I almost never read those because, I actually try, but then I sort of check it out after a while. And then I'm annoyed because I'm big enough to understand that I did say yes and it's on me, but I'm also big enough to understand that it was deliberately written to be annoying. Not to be annoying, but to be hard to understand. This is one of those places where you kind of chuckle a little bit. Google tried to sort of quietly slip this in, and then some news organizations picked it up. Because it was quiet, they made a big deal of it, which I think is what they got what they deserved. And the point here is that they're saying, oh yeah, Bard is actually scraping data to use its language model. Now, there's a lot of implications to that. It's not a big surprise that Google doesn't really like your privacy and will take and steal all your stuff. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. But what this does do is that, I could publish a blog post and you could come along, copy and paste that and repost it somewhere. But that's probably going to be found out. And at least it would be pasted sort of in entirety. So while it's possible to steal my intellectual property that way, it's also easier to track, and it's still kind of the block of text that I wrote to some extent, right? This is kind of an interesting, Bard is going to come along, read my blog post, and then take information from that blog post, repurpose it with a bunch of other information, use it then to formulate its answers to something else. And I don't know, David, give me your impression of this. I can't quite decide if that is the same as you reading my blog post, reading 10 other blog posts, and then writing a blog post on what you've learned together. That's perfectly fine. That's how I probably wrote my blog post in the first place. Or if this feels weirdly different, like Google is benefiting from Bard stealing my ideas, but then obfuscating them in such a way that I can't really tell that they're my ideas anymore, but I had a piece of that. There's a little bit of both ways there. So I don't know if you've got a perspective on that might be worth thinking about.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about putting any sort of content out on the internet is the fact that once you put it out there, there is just so much that can be done with it. And just the rise of AI and large language models has just put such a spotlight on what internet content can get used for and how your intellectual property, as soon as you put it out there on the internet, just has, you can try to protect it in only so many different ways if you are not wanting it to be used in certain ways. But at the end of the day, the internet, once you put something out there, you can't take it back. It's out there in the internet permanently for anyone to see, anyone to look at, and for anyone to manipulate and do what they want with, essentially. And so that's just sort of the tricky part, because on the one hand, you kind of signed up for whatever you put out on the internet to be used for whatever people want it to be used for. So I kind of feel that way to an extent, but there's also just the fact that these big companies are, even if they're in just a roundabout way, making money off of it and using and improving their products. These companies are improving their products based on work that you put out there. And in basically any other industry, that would be something that you would be compensated for. Is if you contributed something that made a product better, then you would have some sort of compensation for it. But yeah, then again, it's just with the internet, as soon as you put anything out there, you're basically saying, companies can use whatever I put on here for their profit and for their benefit. Like if you have signed up for any sort of social media website, then you are automatically signing up to allow them to use any sort of information that they have collected on you to advertise to you and to make money off of advertisers. And so I agree. I see what you're saying in that it feels different. It feels weird in that knowing that something that you have put out there on the internet can contribute to just this AI model. It's a very strange feeling, and I can see why people have a problem with it, especially creatives who work for thousands and thousands of hours on some of their projects. And yet at the same time, if you're going to be putting things out in an internet marketplace, it's kind of just the reality that you have to deal with at this point.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to I don't have a good answer here. So if you're listening to this, I'll just kind of show the spoiler alert and say I don't know that I've got a conclusion. To some extent, what AI is doing is precisely what humans do, and I have done myself. Mm-hmm. So, I would go so far as to say, both from a practical reality as well as a theological position, I would say that nothing that I have published, talked about, spoken about, taught, trained, passed on to my children, spoken to in audiences, taught in the classes that we do is original. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, I would say, theologically, God is the creator. So he originally created stuff. And so what I do is I take things that God already created and rearrange it. And that is that is acting in God's image, being made in God's image, right? From a practical standpoint, I don't think there's anything such as original art, right? I mean, it's all a reflection of something else.
Yeah.
And so, this is precisely what I do. I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I've watched a lot of YouTube channels. I've talked to a lot of people. I've experienced a lot of things. I guess experiencing the things, we'll take those out. So let's take that one out and go back and do that list again. I have read a lot of books. I've read a lot of articles. I have researched a lot on the net, on the web. I have listened to podcasts. And when I publish, speak, teach, and write, it is a synthesis of all those things. There are ideas that I would not have if it hadn't been for authors that I've read and people that I've learned from. Now, when I copy them directly, of course, you have to cite them or that's plagiarism. But, I would say that everything that we teach in Unbound, which is where David and I work, every class I teach there, that all has its genesis in something that I read someplace else, right? If it's a direct quote, we attribute it. But other than that, it's a synthesis of all those things together. That's the original creation, the way we've mixed, the way I've mixed all those different things. That's the way humans work. So what is it that I don't like about the AI doing it? It feels like, and I'm going to take a shot here, but I'm not sure if this is the right way. If somebody reads my stuff and then uses it and republishes and synthesizes it and all those things, which is what I would have done, then I feel like they're an entity out there that I can both learn from and interact with. When something like an AI does it, it seems very impersonal and very large and very hard to respond to. So in many ways, if you're an author, right, and somebody reads your books and then teaches other people or builds a platform using things I've learned in your books, that's a form of flattery and it's exciting. And I would say that I can now interact with that person and learn from them and we can kind of ramp things up. But if Bard comes along and steals my stuff and uses it like 1 little percent or one little piece or one little thought right here, spread out over a large course of things, I never can really see where my ideas went. And I don't have that opportunity to interact with somebody. Is that different from if I published a book, it became a New York Times bestseller, and millions of people around the world were taking pieces of it and using it? I guess functionally, no. But
it's just very
feels
impersonal.
Different, right? So it's an interesting thing. So anyhow, this article was interesting from that standpoint. It immediately took me down this path. And of course, now you see a reaction. The last paragraph here is that Twitter and Reddit have recently taken drastic measures to try and prevent other companies from freely harvesting their data, but it's negatively affected the core Twitter and Reddit user experiences. And so I think this sets us up for something we'll talk about a little bit here, David, in terms of how do you manage all this kind of stuff. But it was an interesting reality for me to go, I cannot put my thumb on and say why this is different from what I am doing. And is that why it bothers me, or is there some other reason? So anyhow.
Yeah, and what I think a final point on this is that I think this just has interesting implications for the knowledge economy now, too. Right. Is that for so long, information has been just such a commodity, and where you get your information, the quality of your information, and the method in which you're getting information, all of that is a huge part of our economy, and has just had to change so much with the internet, because now with just global communication being almost completely democratized, now the economy of information had to drastically change. And now we have these systems that are allowing us to take all of this different information, all of this information that is from all over the place that has been spread out over the internet, and condense it, and is able to interpret it in these different ways and essentially reprocess so much of that information. Now just the knowledge economy is, I think, going to have to adjust in some really interesting ways. And frankly, I have no idea what that is entirely going to look like going forward, but that was just a thought I had, that's going to be big.
Yeah, that's we're going to go a little off path here, and we'll get to your article in a second here, David. But
okay,
this crosses into, those of you who might have hear us or know us from Unbound will hear some familiar phrases in this knowledge-based economy. And we use a lot of language in Unbound, both for our students and in our public podcasts and presentations and speaking events. We say, we argue quite extensively that we are no longer in an answers-based economy, that we're in a questions-based reality. Or we don't say economy, we actually use paradigm. We're no longer in an answers-based paradigm, we're in a questions-based paradigm. And what we say by that is that, the entire system of education that you are used to is predicated on an answers-based paradigm, which is you don't have the information and you need to go to a specialized place to absorb that information. And our argument has been that that's a completely unrealistic, that does not match the reality of the day. The reality of the day is that you have access to almost the entirety of the world's information. So now it's about asking questions and then sorting the answers and then applying them. But David, you're bringing up an excellent point, which is in some ways it's a step removed and then doubled down to that. Because now we're seeing the advent of a technology that can actually ask the questions. And so your job and the learning is to question the answer. So it's not answers based anymore. The entirety of the world's knowledge is available. It's not asking the question and finding the answers. You can now get an AI to do that. It's the ability to ask a question of the answer the AI gives you to check A, if it's accurate, and B, then the key becomes the application. And so there's an interesting argument there for what it means to be human, because it has truncated a process down to the point, which is where the point was all the time anyhow. So David, let me take a little shot here and see if I can think this through.
Okay.
So my grandfather worked in the mill as a millwright. And so a millwright is a person who has specialized training and education to work the mills in this is a steel mill, to do very precision work. And so for my grandfather to get to that point, he had to work in the mill. He had, in his case, he never actually finished high school even, but he was very good at math. So he had picked that up from his educational experiences. Then he had experience in the mill. Then he took, and to his surprise, passed the millwright exam. So he showed that he had knowledge. And then the knowledge that he had learned, he went to the mill shop and the people there taught him more information. And then he was able to apply that information and run the mill. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, what I described sounds like somebody's career, but from the other end, the only thing that's important is the last section of that story. He ran the mill, right? Everything before that is just preparation for that piece. He doesn't actually deliver value to the steel mill until he runs the mill to accomplish the things that the steel mill needs to accomplish with the mill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so everything up to that point is I don't know about wasted effort, but from a productivity standpoint, from a impact the world standpoint, this is all somebody who doesn't know knowing. This is information that already exists, going from already existing to one particular person so that that person can apply it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that might be interesting to think about, listeners, is that what AI is doing is it keeps shortening that lead up and it gets us to the point. So in other words, that information that exists is now automatically being sorted, automatically being categorized, automatically being kind of sifted. But the part that is still absolutely essential is when the human takes it and applies it to the problem. Mm-hmm. And in a millwright, you would actually take your hands and physically manipulate something to do that, right? But there is still an essential piece here, even in the intellectual world, where a human has to say, how do I take this information and apply it to this problem so I get the solution that I want? And that requires a very human touch of understanding what the problem is, what the outcome is desired, and what qualifies as a good way to achieve that desired outcome. There's an interesting thought experiment that people say The problem with AI is if you embodied AI in a robot, like a Boston Dynamics robot, and you told the AI, take this tea to the person who ordered it, without thinking through the rest of the implications, the AI would stomp a puppy, kill a kitten, run over a child, and break a window if they needed to deliver the tea to the person that ordered it, right? In other words, a human would step around the puppy, pet the cat, say nice things to the child, and walk around the window instead of going through it to deliver the tea, knowing that the tea is subservient to and less important than killing puppies, damaging kittens, hurting kids, and breaking windows. But the AI doesn't know that unless you teach it. And so there's an aspect here where that's a sort of simplified black and white example of the fact that it's not just about knowing what the question is and applying the answer to it. It's also knowing what is an appropriate way to apply the knowledge to fix the solution, to achieve the solution. And that is still, at least to date, and absent whatever the general learning thing or whatever, absent some really more sophisticated AI than we have now, that is still an essential human thing. So, okay, rabbit trail ended.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this clip of the Alternative Ideas podcast. If you want to see more clips where we're having discussions just like this one, you can check all of those out, as well as the full episodes of the podcast here on the Alternative Ideas YouTube channel.